My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm a 23-year-old office worker, married for 2 years now. I have a son, Leo, who just turned 1. My husband, Nathan, is 29 and also works for a company. Nathan frequently suggests that I quit my job at my father's company, a sentiment stemming from his dislike for my parents. His distaste for my parents appears to be linked to the fact that my father is a high school dropout and runs a small and grimy company, manufacturing screws and small components. Nathan hates the idea of people knowing he's related to such a company. On the other hand, I admire my father for his tireless dedication to research, his courage, not afraid of failure, and his genuine care for his employees. Thus, I have no intention of leaving my father's company. He seems to dislike the fact that I respect my father more than him. One morning, while having breakfast with Nathan and our son Leo, Nathan brought it up again.
Alyssa, you should really think about getting a job at a bigger company. Considering you graduated from a prestigious university, you're beautiful, and I want to brag about you at work. But I can't, because your workplace is awful. And honestly, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider becoming a housewife?
This conversation has been over and over again. Every time it comes up, I repeat the same answer, that I will not quit my father's company. Typically, these discussions conclude with Nathan making threatening remarks to me like,
"You're the only one in the world who doesn't listen to me."
Or,
"If you keep this up, it's going to be harder for us to stay together."
After this, he usually leaves, but it doesn't end there. Following these discussions, Nathan often does something to upset me and then gloats.
"Still, won't you listen to me now?"
While I can't say divorce is out of the question, I can't bring myself to do it. Both our parents get along so well and love Leo so much, it would break my heart to upset them. My father and father-in-law are good friends, going golfing and fishing together. My mother and mother-in-law also get along very well, frequently going to art exhibitions together. Both sets of parents adore Leo and have provided him with a loving environment that I wouldn't want to take away. Regardless, my love for Nathan has faded away. I don't even like sleeping in the same bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in the child's room with a lock on the door. The reason I added the lock was that Nathan would come into the room while I was sleeping with Leo and start complaining about my father's company. Leo was scared and cried due to Nathan's loud voice in the dark. Since then, Nathan has stopped coming in at night, but I still lock the door just to be safe. As for the harassment I received from Nathan this morning for refusing to quit my father's company, it was as always, just as petty. Despite dinner being ready, he didn't come home. Instead, he went to a night bar with colleagues and sent me a photo of him with a big smile, his face close to one of the female staff. This kind of photo doesn't hurt me or make me feel insecure. As soon as I saw the photo he sent on my messaging app, a new message came in.
"See, this is how I blow off steam, because you won't listen to me."
He said,
"If you don't want me to do this anymore, quit your father's company now."
Honestly, I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of both sets of parents and our son Leo, I responded. This was my best response. "I just wanted you to come straight home and have dinner with us." In response, he texted back.
"Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now."
I found myself regretting marrying him, thinking even though he is smart, his character and thought process are so childlike. Then one day, Nathan happily reported,
"I might be getting promoted soon."
"Wow, that's great. Did that recent deal come through?"
"It's not finalized yet, but it's as good as done. I bet the boss will be thrilled, crying with joy. Even the director, who used to act so high and mighty, will have to bow down to me now. Ha ha."
That day, Nathan unusually didn't tell me to quit my father's job and went off to his company. As for me, I left home with Leo to go to my office. After dropping Leo off at my parents' house nearby as usual, I went to work where my coworker, Jake, hurriedly approached me.
"Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually angry today. Did something happen? Everyone is worried about him."
Upon hearing this, I knocked and entered the room marked Invention Room, where my father was. There sat a young man in his 20s, with a tear-streaked face on the sofa. Sitting across from him was my father, his face more furious than I had ever seen.
"Sorry, Alyssa. I can't spare the time to chat with you right now,"
he said, to which I responded, "Everyone's worried about you. What's going on?" Apologizing, he invited me to sit in on the conversation. As I took a seat next to my father and looked at the young man's face, he stood up to introduce himself.
"Nice to meet you. I'm Scott. I'm sorry for causing the boss any trouble."
I asked him, "May I know what happened?" Scott, apparently an employee with an electrical machinery manufacturer, started to explain. It seems that Scott is employed at an electrical machinery manufacturer. Moreover, he's been promoted to the position of assistant leader for a new machinery project. Interestingly, the designated leader doesn't attend meetings or go to the field, basically serving as a figurehead. The team members reportedly prefer this, stating, "It's easier that way." In essence, Mr. Scott was fulfilling the leader's role. It appears that some components from my father's company were chosen for the project. Scott, without any prior arrangement, visited my father's company and rudely demanded,
"I need to speak to the CEO."
His appearance, characterized by his unkempt hair and numerous rings, didn't sit well with my father's secretaries, fondly known as Jackson and Randy, who told Scott,
"Please adjust your attitude and appearance before coming back."
Unaware of what was wrong with his demeanor and looks, Scott returned to his company and asked his boss, who snapped,
"Don't let them walk all over you. Assert yourself and tell them we're using their parts."
Wanting to fill his colleagues' wishes to use my father's company's components, Scott returned to my father's company and humbly asked Jackson and Randy,
"Please let me know what I'm doing wrong."
My father, who happened to overhear the conversation, talked with Scott in the meeting room.
"We don't judge people by their appearances. I believe they were just trying to teach you workplace manners,"
his father said. Jackson and Randy agreed and proceeded to instruct Scott on professional etiquette. With such an appearance, when you visit other companies, they'll likely judge your entire company based on how you present yourself. When asked,
"Which company do you think one can have a decent conversation with? One where people are well-dressed and respectful of manners, or one that isn't?"
Scott apparently replied,
"The former, but let me apologize and start again."
Following that, Scott made an appointment, showed up with his back straight, fixed hair, and without any accessories. As we talked with Scott, we saw his sincerity and commitment to his work, not only in terms of components, but my father said that he was so willing to cooperate with ideas and knowledge. That's how they ended up collaborating. Young members of Scott's company proactively visited my father's company for advice. However, just before a prototype was almost completed after nearly 6 months, it was revealed that the leader had taken all the presentation materials that were prepared. Not only that, but the assistant leader was removed, and a young female employee who he favored was promoted. Although the team and the collaborators vehemently opposed this, they were silenced with threats such as, "Anyone who objects will be made uncomfortable in the company by spreading various rumors." Upon hearing this, my father was furious. Jackson, who had been listening in the background, said,
"About those various rumors, they're just going to spread lies, right? You shouldn't be scared, right?"
However, the reason the assistant leader was removed was apparently because he reported a violation of working hours to the HR department. Scott said that after severe warnings, the assistant leader was removed. The reason Scott came to my father's company this time was because he was frustrated that the person in charge would change despite all he had done for him, and he wanted to discuss everything.
"You should quit that company and come work for ours, right, boss?"
"All right, Jackson and Randy, are you ready?"
My father, impersonating an iconic Western movie character, made everyone except Scott burst into laughter. Scott said,
"Despite doing such amazing work, you all seem to be having fun. I've always admired that. I really wanted to work with you all.
and he pleaded with teary eyes, bowing his head joyfully to my father. There was something that had been bothering me after listening to his story, so I asked Scott a question. I asked, "What's the name of your company?" And it turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company as my husband's. Hesitantly, I asked further, can I ask the name of the leader?" And as I had feared, he replied,
"His name is Nathan Johnson."
Upon hearing that, my father and I held our heads in shock. After a brief silence, Randy said,
I knew I'd heard that name before. It's Alyssa's husband."
I said, "Scott, I'm sorry, that's my husband." And Scott said,
"He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company, so I'm actually grateful to him now."
Jackson seemed to have something on his mind, too, and asked cautiously,
I hate to ask, but given that Alyssa's here, does the favored female employee have any relation with your husband?
Scott looked at my face and seemed to have difficulty speaking. So I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore," which surprised my father. After apologizing to my flustered father, I honestly told him about all the things that had been said and done to me every day, and why I hadn't been able to speak up. He understood and said,
"No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me."
Then, after hearing everything, he added,
"I've lived a life that I'm not ashamed of, so I don't care what anyone says about me. But it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing bad things about her parents. Don't worry, though. I'll keep my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome."
His words made me feel like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders.
And what about the relationship between your husband and this favored female employee?
Jackson asked. Scott replied,
"There's no solid evidence, just rumors. But it's the talk of the company. Several employees have seen the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms. A few employees have even seen them going out for lunch together."
At this point, Randy began making a phone call.
Hey, I have a case that I'd like you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?"
After hanging up, he said,
"I'm going to have a friend of mine at the private detection agency look into this."
Now, Jackson started to make a phone call as well.
Hello? I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce due to infidelity. Oh, you can? Can you come to the office right now? Thanks.
As Jackson and Randy made progress on their calls, my dad said,
"Your greatest strength has to be your ability to take action."
He was laughing as he watched the scene unfold. Scott also offered to keep a careful eye on the two of them. For the time being, everyone returned to their workplaces to get back to work. My father, too, expressed his concern to the worried employees, saying,
"I'm sorry for the concern, but it looks like we can laugh about it now. My apologies for causing worry, and thank you, as always."
Hearing this, smiles returned to the faces of the employees, and the usual lively atmosphere was restored in the workplace. My father came over to me and asked,
"May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?"
To which I replied, "I just want you to tell them to continue visiting and showing affection for Leo, as I always have." By early afternoon, a private detective and a lawyer arrived to discuss our future course of action in the planning room. The contents of this meeting were then shared with everyone present. It was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would convey the details of the discussion. After work, when I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation. From my own perspective, apologizing for my inability to reveal my husband's true nature. I felt as if I had trampled on the feelings of my parents, who believed we were living happily. My mother, far from being upset, seemed thrilled, declaring, "Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson." She had not missed the disdainful look my husband had given my father's company the first time he saw it, and suspected he was not a good man. I wish you had told me sooner. The next day, it appeared Jackson received a phone call on his smartphone from Scott. Scott had submitted his resignation, informing the company he intended to spend his remaining time on miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation. However, all the members of the project team reportedly visited the HR department to state, "We have all violated the company's work rules like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us as well." Upon seeing resignation letters in everyone's hands, the HR department was thrown into a frenzy. My husband had already left home by the end of regular working hours, so a meeting was held in the large conference room between the company president, department heads, and the remaining project members, including Scott. There it was stated that my husband, who was the team leader, had not attended any meetings or been present at work, and had in fact not contributed at all to the project. Further, it was reported that when he learned that the presentation and required documents had been completed by the entire team, he took all the credit, removed Scott from his position as deputy leader, and replaced him with a female employee he favored. The company president reportedly expressed deep regret if this was indeed true. At that point, Scott suggested that no drastic action be taken until all evidence was gathered. The reason he gave was that as the sister-in-law of one of the company's clients, they were also conducting an investigation using a private detective, and it was proposed that nothing be said to my husband without evidence. The company agreed to wait until the evidence was collected, and then to question my husband before deciding on disciplinary action. They asked the team members to hold off on their resignations. Unaware of these serious events, my husband, who usually comes home on time, returned home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He began ranting about how useless everyone else was, boasting about how he had been working overtime to make the project a success. He thought everyone was just jealous because he was going to be promoted to department head after the project's success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I gave him a few compliments, which I didn't really mean. He seemed to enjoy picturing himself as department head, being looked up to and envied. My husband kept grinning. The next day at work, Scott's plan was put into action. All team members began to continuously praise my husband. "Mr. Department Head, not quite yet." "It seems the CEO is very hopeful about this project." "How can we become competent men like you, Mr. Johnson?" Continuously showered with such compliments, my husband was thrilled and in a constant state of excitement. His guard seemed to be dropping. Then, as planned, we were able to obtain a video of my husband's affair with a female employee from the hidden cameras set up in the document room and the conference room. In just 5 days, a ton of evidence of his infidelity had been collected by both the detective agency and Scott. All that was left was to prove that my husband had not been the one to create the project documents. The proof was easy. Scott had also saved the documents on a USB drive, and it would be clear to the company if they asked him and my husband about the contents of the documents. All of the evidence was submitted to the company by Scott and other members. My husband came home in high spirits, unaware of all of this. Then he began his flight of fantasy, saying, "I'm definitely going to be made department head. The CEO was talking to the current head for a long time. And then the head looked at me. He probably said, 'I'd rather have Mr. Johnson as head than any incompetent like you.'" He then continued his fantasy talk. "With this, the gap between your father's company and mine will widen even more. You should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head," he said. I replied loudly, seemingly angry. "Your parents will be mad if they knew you were mocking my parents. You know they're good friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I will absolutely not quit." My husband got angry and said, "Never invite your parents to our family events. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women flocking around me as soon as I become department head." When I asked, "Are you sure about this?" he replied,
"What do you mean? Don't contact me again."
So I responded, "All right, I'll leave." And I had him sign the prepared divorce papers. The next morning, I saw my husband go to work in silence, and then I called my father to help me move. As my father, company workers, and I were loading our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived saying, "We came to help." My in-laws apologized to me, and I apologized to them. "Thank you for letting us be Leo's grandparents. Our idiot son is disowned. We're counting on you from now on, Alyssa." As they both bowed their heads, I held their hands and said, "Thank you," while also bowing my head. My father said,
"Let's hurry up and move so we can relax at home."
to which my father-in-law responded,
"Let's do that,"
and continued helping with the move. The move went smoothly, and in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was getting a divorce from my husband. My in-laws apologized repeatedly, but my father responded,
"Let's continue to get along, Ken,"
and playfully patted my father-in-law's knee. My mother said, "Mary, let's continue to do embroidery together. There's an art exhibition next week. Let's go," and playfully patted my mother-in-law's knee. My father said,
"Ken, Mary, why don't you stay at our house tonight? Let's have a drink,"
and brought out some drinks. My father-in-law said,
"Thanks. We'll take you up on that offer tonight."
and my parents and in-laws got along even better. Not wanting to get in the way, I decided to go to Leo's room and go to sleep. The next day, my husband was called into a conference room by executives like the CEO and department head. In addition to the executives, Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with were also there. The hearing for my husband was conducted by the CEO himself. First, he was asked if he intended to claim the project as his own without participating in it and stealing the documents when they were completed. Since Scott and the team members were present, it seemed he couldn't make any excuses. The CEO, growing impatient with my husband's silence, demanded loudly,
"Well, what do you have to say?"
My husband, it seems, quickly admitted to his actions. Next, he was asked why he had removed Scott from the sub-leader position and replaced him with a female employee. My husband responded,
"I thought she was more capable than Mr. Scott."
but the department head retorted,
"Are you saying the lady who does nothing more than serving tea and making copies is more capable than Mr. Scott?"
My husband bit his lip, lowered his head, and fell silent. The CEO then exclaimed,
"The real reason is this, isn't it?"
and proceeded to project still images from the video footage taken in the conference room and the document room. Both my husband and the female employee, Alice, turned pale. When the CEO asked Alice,
"Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?"
Alice responded unabashedly, "Mr. Johnson said that if we were together, he'd make it easy for me to earn my salary. Besides, I have a boyfriend, so I wasn't serious about being with him. I just thought of it as part of the job." My husband was infuriated by her response, exclaiming,
You had a boyfriend, you cheating woman. You've ruined my life."
"You have a wife too, Nathan. Don't get mad at me," Alice retorted, and a quarrel ensued. The CEO fed up and announced,
"The fact-checking is over. I'll inform you of the disciplinary action later. Until then, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you're both suspended and should stay at home."
With that, he left the conference room, and everybody else quickly followed suit. As a result, my husband was reassigned to the menial job of sorting documents in a basement, what's commonly referred to as a useless department at the company. Alice, after her boyfriend found out about her affair, had a hard time at the office and eventually chose to resign as well. A lawyer had prepared an agreement for them to sign, and my husband was to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million as consolation money. They both ended up taking loans from consumer finance companies to cover these payments. Moreover, I had my husband agree to pay an additional $5,000 per month for Leo's child support. A few months later, my husband, who had been disowned by his parents, was working 2 jobs, at a convenience store during the day and as a security guard for a parking lot at night, and living alone in an old apartment. Someone who saw him said he looked as if he was about 60 years old. He had aged so much.
What the hell is going on? You didn't make lunch today. Over the phone, my husband abruptly yelled at me. He seemed irritated that I hadn't made his lunch and that I had been away from home. I told him to look after himself while I was gone, but he said, "Look, you're a housewife, right? Why you're skipping? You're a housewife who skips duties?" My husband didn't seem convinced. What a small man he is to make such a big deal about not having lunch for one day. I was fed up with him doing all of the housework and then taking it out on me when things didn't go his way. My mother-in-law had a faint smile on her face as she stood beside me, listening to my husband's yelling over the phone. My name is Emily. I live with my husband and 2 children. Seth and Ray are twin boys who are 2 years old. I am so happy as the mother of twins who are so adorable. Raising these children is unquestionably the source of my current happiness. Nicholas, my husband, is a typical businessman. My husband's family owns a Japanese-style confectionery store in a shopping arcade corner. I quit my job shortly after my marriage, and I'm now assisting my in-laws with their store. With a light heart, I began working at the shop. But the work at the confectionery was much busier than I had anticipated. I not only serve customers in the store with its colorful selection of wagashi, but I also make my own sweets in the back kitchen. I have to be in the kitchen from early morning to prepare the sweets on time during the busiest times of the year. I continue to assist after the birth of my twins. I would sometimes stand in the store with my children on my back. Their cries would sometimes carry into the store, even when I was babysitting them away from the store. While caring for the young children, I continued to work at the store. My husband, on the other hand, was unconcerned about the wagashiya. "Hey, do you still have no plans to take over the confectionery business?" I asked. We've discussed it several times, but my husband appears to have no intention of taking over the confectionery business. "I've told you numerous times. I'm not going to take over the store. Isn't wagashiya so lame these days? The number of people in the shopping arcade is decreasing year by year. And if I take over the confectionery business now, I will have no future." My husband has no desire to take over the wagashiya of his family. Of course, he can't take over the store right now because he works for a larger corporation. But I like my in-law's store and don't want to see it go away. "Are you going to the pachinko again today, Nicholas?" "Sure. Of course I am." "Is it harmful?" "What I do on my day off is entirely up to me." On holidays, my husband always goes out to play pachinko. He even gets in line to play pachinko as soon as it opens. Despite this, he ignores the housework. I did all of the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, as well as the housework. Moreover, the most important aspect of child rearing was completely left to me. My husband spent the time at his own pace while I was busy with housework, childcare, and the confectionery shop. My in-laws are getting older, and my workload at the confectionery shop is increasing. My in-laws, particularly my mother-in-law, were extremely understanding of my situation. "Emily, you help us with the store, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much for everything." This was how my mother-in-law always expressed her gratitude. She's a lovely lady who has nothing to do with the wife-mother-in-law situation. Her gentle and kind smile warmed my heart. "I really need Nicholas's assistance," she explained. He no longer appears to be interested in the confectionery. My mother-in-law always looked sad when we talked about my husband. I suppose she really wants him to take over the company. But her husband refused to agree. Well, we're lucky to have such a wonderful wife, Emily. We should stop being greedy. My mother-in-law lavishes praise on me. She also values my assistance at the store while raising my children. When I'm at the store, she babysits the kids with my father-in-law, which is a big help. And my mother-in-law has become my go-to person with whom I can talk about anything. Of course, she listens to my complaints of my husband. Ironically, the more distance I feel from my husband, the stronger my bond with my mother-in-law grows. The presence of my in-laws was very reassuring to me right now. With such a life, the days fly by in a blur. Raising 2 children means that each day flies by with no time to think about anything else. It's almost the end of the year, and the Wagashiya is getting busy. It coincides with the end-of-year gift-giving season, and we are in transition. After consulting with my in-laws, I decided to stay at home this year and focus on wagashi preparation. I informed my husband of this. What? Are you taking the kids and staying at my parents' house? My husband was clearly upset. I explained to him that I would only be staying for one night to assist on a busy day. How about the housework? The response was as expected. It is a more serious problem for my husband, who does not do any housework at all. If I do not do housework for even one day, he gets upset, even if it's the busy season for the confectionery. This time, I'll only be away for one night. So can't you be cooperative during that time? It's only a single day, so everything should be fine, right? If you get hungry, you prepare some meals. There will be no laundry to do if it is only for one day. I told my husband that there was nothing to be concerned about, but he continued to complain. You know what? You're still a housewife, aren't you? I tell you this again. I'm the family's breadwinner. Who do you believe is in charge of feeding our 2 children? My husband began to grumble. I didn't want to talk to him any longer. I didn't say anything else, and I took the kids to my in-laws' house without my husband's permission. I had a lot of work waiting for me when I arrived at my parents' house. It was the end of the year, and business was brisk at the Wagashiya. Orders for year-end gifts were pouring in faster than usual, and my decision to stay and assist was not wrong. The creation of gift items begins with the assembly of empty boxes. This is a surprisingly difficult job, especially at the end of the year when hundreds of boxes must be made for year-end gifts. My in-laws and I divided up the box-making duties. After the first day at my in-laws' house, I was exhausted, but the next day I had to work hard from early in the morning to make wagashi. To prepare for the next day, I decided to go to bed early. And by the time dawn arrived, I had already started working. While the kids were still sleeping, my in-laws and I stayed in the kitchen and worked quietly on the wagashi. The sun had risen before I knew it, and the morning of December had arrived. With the fresh air and morning sun, we decided to take a break and eat breakfast. The kids were already awake and ready for breakfast. I hurriedly prepared breakfast for them and served it at the table, and they came running up to me smiling. My in-laws, sons, and I were all seated around the table. My phone rang right then and there. It was my husband who called. What the heck is going on? You didn't make lunch today. My husband yelled at me as soon as I picked up the phone. He seemed irritated that there was no lunchbox, which was supposed to be available at all times. I told him to make his own lunch while I was gone, But had he forgotten? What do you mean, avoiding housework? When I told my husband that he should prepare the food himself, he seemed unconvinced. He accuses me of laziness. What a prick he is to make such a big deal about not having lunch only for one day. He leaves everything up to me, and when things don't go his way, he transforms into this. I was shocked, and my in-laws appeared to be as well, because they could clearly hear my husband yelling over the phone. Finally, my husband rambled on about what he wanted to say before abruptly hanging up the phone. Even though breakfast has just been served, the living room of my in-laws' house was quiet for a while. My husband lost his cool in an unreasonable way, so it was as expected. The kids seemed to sense the atmosphere and refused to eat their breakfast. My mother-in-law cheerfully said itadakimasu and urged my sons to eat their breakfast as well, as if to draw out the atmosphere. She then turned to face me and said, "Why don't you divorce my son, Emily?" My movement comes to a halt as I reach for my tea. I never expected my mother-in-law to say something like that to me. My father-in-law was eating his breakfast quietly, with an indescribable expression on his face. I believe I was a little out of line, but now that you've been told something like that, I believe you've come to your senses. As she spoke to me, my mother-in-law smiled. It seems that when a person is truly disgusted, there is no choice but to laugh. I feel terrible for you as a mother. You are no longer required to be merciful to my son. Allow your emotions to guide you. My mother-in-law had probably figured out how I felt about him by now. My mother-in-law was on my side. My mother-in-law is always supportive and encouraging. My father-in-law never speaks, but he nods in agreement to my mother-in-law's words. The presence of my in-laws was reassuring to me, and it was on this day that I returned home. I waited for my husband's return with my mind made up. My husband returned home later in the evening. He had a tense expression on his face, as if he was still upset that I hadn't prepared his lunch. I asked him to take a seat because I needed to speak with him. I motioned for him to take a seat. "What do you want to talk about?" He cocked his brow and looked at me. I told him to sit down again, ignoring his mood. I held out the divorce papers when he sat down grimly. "I'm going to divorce you." The words divorce slipped out of my mouth. My husband's grumpy expression abruptly changed to one of surprise. "Why did you say divorce so abruptly? Are you kidding me? The kids are still so young." My husband was in a panic, not understanding why I was seeking a divorce. He's adamant that he does not want a divorce. In addition, there is no reason for me to divorce in the first place. So he tried to avoid the discussion by claiming it was invalid. "There's a reason." I stopped him from fleeing. Then I pulled a few photos from an envelope on the table. There was a photo of my husband walking with a woman holding hands. "Didn't you say you go to pachinko on your days off? What exactly is this? You appear to be having a good time." When he saw the photo, my husband's face turned pale. I pressed him to tell me what was going on. "No, listen to me." He was making up some nonsense excuse about how she was just an acquaintance. "She's a junior employee at your company, isn't she?" My husband's movement ceased when I mentioned the identity of the woman in the photograph. My husband had an affair with a younger woman who worked at the same company as him. I had been suspicious of his behavior and had discussed it with my mother-in-law for some time. My mother-in-law suggested I hire a detective to investigate an affair. The findings of the subsequent investigation astounded me. My husband had entered a pachinko parlor with a woman and then gone directly to her room. I have more photos. You two are very close, so the investigator could take many photos. Would you like to see more? When confronted with undeniable evidence, the husband finally confessed. He readily admitted that he was a pachinko fan, that he had a romantic relationship with this woman, and that he had been visiting her room during the day. I'm sorry, Emily. I was just experimenting with fire. I'm sorry for my kids. I'm leaving this girl right now, so please don't divorce me. My husband, who was no longer at my mercy, apologized emphatically. However, I will never forgive him. I'm dead set on getting a divorce. I'm not joking. I've been assisting at your parents' home. While babysitting, I have taken care of things that you do not want me to do. I've informed your father and mother about this. My in-laws, I told my husband, were on my side, not his. They have both stated that they will assist me in any way they can. We work together, so there was plenty of time to talk. They explained. They were both furious at you. Of course, I informed them that we were divorcing. My husband completely lost his cool. He broke down in tears. Please, I would never do a thing like this. My caution appeared to have completely overwhelmed him. He just kept muttering that he didn't want a divorce after that. I can't do it with you any longer. I will make certain that you pay alimony and child support. I noticed him of a divorce. My husband begged for more forgiveness on his knees, but I refused to listen to him. As a result, my husband and I divorced. I insisted on alimony payments from both my husband and the woman with whom he had an affair. My husband had to pay child support for our children as well. My husband then chose to resign from his job with the woman who had lost her position in the company after the company discovered their affair. My in-laws were furious and informed my husband that he would be cut off from his family and barred from the family home. My husband, who has no one to rely on, is now compelled to work from morning to night doing manual labor in order to pay his monthly bills. After the divorce, I continue to work at the wagashia. My in-laws asked me to continue. I enjoy working in the store, and of course, I need to support my children. My in-laws want me to run the store after they retire. They intend to eventually give me the store and their home. Naturally, I intend to take over. In the future, I will be the confectionery's proprietress. I will continue to work hard at my job and raise my children while looking ahead.